I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. We're checking in with Barbara Guinn, Commissioner at the State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, the agency responsible for overseeing much of New York's social safety net. Thanks for making the time, Commissioner.
Always good to have the opportunity to talk about our work.
Well, I want to start actually by looking back at this past year and the expansion of the Empire State Child Credit, which families could claim when they filed their taxes this year for 2025. Do you have any sense of the utilization of this expanded benefit?
We do have some preliminary information just based on the first 6 months of the year, and things look very promising for New York families. Again, preliminary results.
Sure.
We'll wait until probably the fall to get the final from the tax department, but we are seeing a significant increase, over 50, almost 60% increase in dollars out the door, which is great news because of the increase in the benefit size, but then also a 5% increase so far in those who are actually applying for the benefit. What we don't know yet is the details, for example, of that increase in applications. Is it, in any way geared toward those at the lowest levels of income, which is what we hope to see. And we're beginning to look at that data, and then we'll also use that to help us with our outreach efforts next year.
Yeah, what were you hoping for as it pertains to the utilization of this tax credit? Because I know you want to get as many dollars out the door as possible.
Yeah, what we really are hoping to see is not just an uptake in the number of families accessing it, but to see a significant increase at the lower level income households. Because that's where we can make a difference in terms of reducing child poverty in New York State. And so the very important policy change that was made along with the increase in benefits was a change so that even households with no income or very low income can receive the maximum credit. So that was a change, and we hope that that drives more families at that lower income spectrum to come in and apply for the benefit so that we can help lift them out of poverty.
Right, because if you're not filing your taxes because for whatever reason maybe you don't have to,
right? Yeah, exactly.
You would miss out on this benefit.
Exactly.
So as the result of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill adopted last summer by the congressional Republicans and signed into law by President Trump, it's my understanding that there will be some changes to the administration of SNAP benefits starting this fall. What are you bracing for come October?
So what's in place this coming October is a reduction in federal reimbursement for administrative costs. So there are many provisions of the H.R. 1 bill that had negative impacts on SNAP. The one that's effective October of this year, it reduces the federal reimbursement from 50% down to 25%. So that has an impact on both the state budget, but also more importantly, the local budget. So counties in New York City, who are the ones who are hiring workers to take in applications, process those applications, and do so timely, they're going to have less reimbursement associated with that work. We are hopeful that local budgets will make up for that difference, because what we certainly don't want to see at this point is any reduction in staffing for that particular program.
Well, all told, how much money are we talking about when we think about the entire share that the federal government is giving up, that 25%? Is this millions of dollars?
Yeah, it is. In New York State, it's about $200 million, and that's a lot for counties to absorb. However, the even larger issue that's facing us the next year, based on the law that was passed, H.R. 1, is a cost share with respect to the benefit payments themselves.
Well, yeah, I want to come back to that, but sticking with the administrative burden, you mentioned the county's cost. Is there anything in this year's state budget that would cover the additional cost to the municipalities that are administering the program?
There was not. So the reduction in federal reimbursement, again, it hits both the state and the locals, and there was no change with respect to the responsibility for that non-federal share.
And in terms of the fiscal years that we're talking about, the state starting in April, the federal government in the fall, counties, I'm imagining, are running on calendar years. Is there an opportunity for the state if, say, lawmakers and the governor decide they want to step in to make up some of these costs? Because like you say, $200 million is no chump change.
Yeah, I mean, there's always an opportunity. The fact that it didn't happen in this last budget, I'm not overly optimistic that something would change. Understanding, as you mentioned, that for counties throughout the state outside of New York City, it is within their current budget year, which is on a calendar year, that they'll begin to see this increase. But that doesn't mean that something couldn't change in the future in terms of either changes at the federal level or the state level.
Well, I imagine the best case scenario for the implementation of something like this is the counties have a rich uncle who dies and gives them enough money to cover all this. But what's the worst case scenario for these counties that are going to be looking at additional costs that maybe they budgeted for, maybe they didn't budget for?
So it certainly is going to require an increase in local investment. There's no question about it. I think the worst case outcome from the standpoint of serving New York residents would be that counties reduce staffing that's necessary to process benefits. And we're certainly not at a place in New York where staffing levels are high. So I think, if anything, we would like to see staffing levels increase. And so we certainly very much hope that local governments will not force staffing reductions among the counties.
And I imagine there are already probably delays in applying for and receiving SNAP benefits at the local level?
So I wouldn't say that there are huge delays. We have
Okay.
certainly had problems in the past with timeliness, and that certainly has been a focus over the past, I would say, 3 years, and over the past prior to HR 1, that was the focus from the federal government, was to make sure that states were doing more to issue benefits timely. Certainly the workforce challenges that locals were facing, that was making that quite difficult, but we made major improvements in terms of our timeliness, going from, say, mid 60% to about, close to 90% at this point. So we've made a lot of improvements, and we certainly don't want to go backwards. At this point, based on our conversations with county social services agency commissioners, we are not hearing that they have been asked to reduce their staff.
Is there anything the state can do to support this transition other than put money aside? Are there rules and regulations you can address? Is there technology you can make accessible so that maybe their efforts can be stretched a little further?
Yeah, absolutely. We are looking at, well, obviously we have a very large modernization project, but that is going to take several years, so we're not waiting for that. Based on the staffing constraints locally, but also our need to reduce any error rate associated with the SNAP program and other benefit programs, we are looking at a number of technology improvements that we may be able to roll out statewide to help counties. We're fortunate that some counties have already taken a step, and they've been working with certain technology solutions to do things like an automated reading of certain portions of information that were required to provide applicants, and to have that done in an automated way rather than having a caseworker have to do that. And when it comes to SNAP, we do have to get federal approval for that. We've achieved federal approval for some of the pieces we'd like to move to have that done, again, on a statewide basis, and other approvals are pending before the federal government.
Well, I want to talk more about the SNAP error rate and the potential shifting in the cost of those SNAP benefits. But first, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. I'm David Lombardo, and we're speaking with Barbara Guinn, Commissioner at the State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. So I've read that for states that have an error rate of SNAP payments above that 6% threshold, there's going to be a pickup of the state's responsibility proportional to, I guess, how far above that threshold they are. I've read that New York's is about twice the expectations at the federal level. How did we get to that situation, and is this something that we can address in the short term?
In the short term, in terms of avoiding any cost shift based on the law as currently structured,
Well, I guess, is there anything we can do to
however,
bring that error rate down in the short
absolutely.
term? Okay.
Absolutely. So our error rate has certainly been, getting below 6%, I must say, is an extraordinary challenge given how the error rate is measured. There are very few states, despite best efforts, that are below 6%. But certainly we can improve from where we are today, and we know that we need to do that. We've made a little bit of progress from February 24 to 25. As you mentioned, we're still nowhere where we need to be. How we got there was, I guess, a combination of factors. One, and importantly, the measurement changed. So again, we've had error rates that were certainly below 8% in the past. And in 2022, USDA made some changes in terms of how the error rate is calculated that did increase our rate out of the gate immediately.
Was that new calculation more reflective of reality? Because sometimes
Yeah.
we have, government stats that don't always capture things, or sometimes they do capture
Absolutely.
things.
It wasn't outright an incorrect way of measuring, but it certainly changed the game in terms of, so it made a decision that if a report, like if households are required to report changes at certain intervals,
Okay.
if they don't report at all, then it assumes that the entire benefit amount was incorrect and should not have been issued. Whereas in reality, that's not likely how it works. Often, people have jobs where the hours and the wages change from month to month. Doesn't mean they're ineligible for SNAP, but that's how the error rate measurement changed. So it's definitely more strict. I would also say, though, in addition to that, New York and other states, at the encouragement of the federal government, have also made certain changes to make it easier for people to access SNAP. And some of those changes would include, in certain instances, lengthening the period of time between which they need to re-document their eligibility. Right? So we did that because we know that often people fall off for administrative reasons.
Sure.
But when you extend the time frame out, then you're more likely to have some errors. And so that's another thing that contributed. And so what we're working to do is just find ways that we can reduce our error rate without limiting access to the program, which is a challenge. And it's what we're seeing in certain other states that have taken very aggressive measures. Their SNAP caseload has dropped considerably. And I don't think it's because people are not in need.
Have you gone through sort of a SNAP whiplash with the changing administrations in D.C.? We have Republicans in the White House now, Democrats before that, Republicans for that, Democrats for that. I mean, do you go back and forth a lot in this world, or is there some sort of consistency despite partisan changes?
I would say prior to H.R. 1, there was relative consistency. You're always going to have changes with an administration with a different focus. But by and large, the SNAP program has been something that has received bipartisan support since it was created. Certain parties or certain administrations want to focus more on work than others do, and that's fine. We can certainly focus on work. We're not hesitant to help people move into the workforce. That is obviously the long-term goal. But with H.R. 1, again, it was really changes that were made that were significant in terms of work requirements, significantly expanding the number of individuals that are subject to those work requirements. Also, the historic cost shifts, again, never seen before in the history of the program. And then also a further reduction of access to the program by legally present non-citizens.
Sure. And after a quick break, we'll have more with Barbara Guinn, Commissioner at the State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're continuing our conversation with Barbara Guinn, Commissioner at the State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, the agency responsible for overseeing much of New York's social safety net. Well, money in this year's budget, after years of asking for it, is supplied to ensure that starting next year in 2027, EBT cards will be chip-enabled, potentially reducing the opportunities for fraud and stolen benefits. What needs to happen between now, as we talk in the late summer of 2026, and the start of 2027, when the Hochul administration has announced that new cards will be distributed?
So what we're working on right now is changes both with the technology behind the scenes so that we in our system can accept and process chip tap payments. We're also working with the retail associations and retailers to get the information out about changes that they'll need to make so that they can also accept chip tap. So those are two processes that are playing out now. We have selected a vendor in order just in terms of producing the physical cards themselves. So that contract is secured and in place so that once all of our technical changes, and then like I said, it's very important that the retailers are ready, and then early 2027 we will begin a mass replacement of EBT cards.
When you say the retailers are ready, are there facilities and shops that only have the swipe readers for credit cards? You're shaking your head yes.
Yeah, there actually are. The one positive we have is since California, which was the first state to move to chip tap, they did a lot of work with retailers. So some of the major chains, the national chains, are probably ready. And so that's good news. But we do, as you know, we have a lot of smaller retailers that need to work with their vendors, their processors, to make sure they're ready to accept chip tap.
And what about ensuring that the people utilizing the cards understand what they're doing? Is there some sort of outreach campaign that the state and some of your partners at the local level are planning?
So when we issue the new cards, we will have instructions for folks about how to use it. We think most people will be familiar with how, because it's lining EBT up with the rest of cards that are used to purchase. So we think that they'll be ready. We're also making sure that retailers help people if they're unsure what to do, because again, chip tap is going to be the safest way to process a transaction. And then we will continue with additional outreach via text and then also social media and other avenues to make sure that recipients are prepared.
And what are your expectations in terms of reducing fraud as a result of this technology?
So our hope is that, I mean, obviously we'd like to reduce fraud to nothing, sure, but based on California's results, we're hoping that it's reduced by at least 80 or 85%. They saw significant reduction in benefit theft once they went to chip tap EBT.
And when you talk about a decrease like that, how many, I imagine millions of dollars are we potentially talking about in lost benefits? Or I should say stolen benefits.
Stolen benefits, absolutely. So when we were tracking it, when we had the ability to replace benefits, we saw over $30 million a year was being stolen from individuals, and we have no reason to think that that has subsided.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. I'm David Lombardo, and we're speaking with Barbara Guinn, Commissioner at the State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. Anything else you're working on that we should be thinking about moving forward with regards to the social safety net here in New York?
I think, we have a meeting coming up this week, a public meeting for our Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council. So we're getting additional input from residents throughout the state, both in our recommendations, but also getting their feedback on the process for accessing benefits. And so we've been a little sidetracked over the past year dealing with a lot of federal issues. And so I really hope within the coming months, we're able to refocus on how can we just simplify some of our processes, documentation requirements to make it easier for folks. That's something that we're working on. And then also we will be, again, moving to advance our integrated eligibility system, and that is our large system modernization project. We've recently gotten some positive feedback from the federal government in terms of our funding request, but it is a massive project. We're moving in certain components well. Others, we're really just getting underway in terms of moving that forward, which is absolutely essential, not only to the people who receive the benefits so that it's easier for them. For example, they have an online portal where they can get all their notices, but also very importantly for our social services districts, just to make the process of determining eligibility easier for them as well.
Well, thinking about child poverty, New York State has the goal of reducing it by half by 2032. It was a goal that was adopted, though, when the federal landscape looked a lot different. And I think there was an expectation from state policymakers that they were going to have partners in D.C. to advance some of these child poverty initiatives. Because as you pointed out earlier, things like SNAP, even though there might be disagreements about how it's implemented, there was a general consensus that it's important, maybe not so much anymore. So when you think about that goal for 2032, is that something that can be feasibly accomplished if the dynamic in Washington remains the same?
There's no question that the dynamic in Washington is making that goal more difficult to achieve, but we certainly need to still keep doing what we can do in New York State to get there. We're dedicated to trying to do so. From a federal landscape, certainly we would love to have a better partner in terms of just doing more with the child tax credit, but also, what we've seen in terms of either direct action to restrict non-citizens who are legally here based on admission by the federal government, restricting their access to benefits is definitely something that we are concerned about and would love to see reversed, because that obviously they also have children and we don't want them living in poverty.
Well, we're coming up on the halfway mark of that decade for setting that goal. So how would you describe where we are in terms of trying to realize that 50% reduction in child poverty?
So based on an analysis that's a little bit dated, but looking at some of the changes that have been put in place, including increases in the minimum wage in New York, again, it's an external analysis that was done that said based on those changes that they would expect to see almost an 18% reduction in child poverty. But again, that's an analysis that assumes take-up rates are 100%. So again, looking at things like the increased child tax credit, we need to look at not only how much is available to households, but how many households that need it are receiving it, and making sure that there is full access. So again, we've got a ways to go, and we're going to keep plodding through with the effort to meet that goal.
Well, finally, another thing you and I have talked about is the name of your office, and specifically actually the acronym, and whether people should call it OTDA or OTDA. That debate, though, may be a moot point because I don't know if you're familiar with there's a bill in the legislature that would rename your office to the Office of Economic Security. What do you think of that streamlined, modern name? Does that have a good ring to it?
It's much better, don't
Yeah?
you think so?
I mean, I won't, necessarily forget what the
It's
official title is of your name, when I do the
Well,
introduction next time. if it's
most
that.
people do, and they usually get something wrong when they say it. It doesn't really reflect well the work that we do. It's not very affirmative. We think Office of Economic Security is a much better name that better reflects what we achieve here in New York State. So we are very pleased that the Senate passed it, and we will be working with the Assembly in an effort to move that forward.
And do you feel like something like that has a substantive impact? Is there some sort of stigma that's addressed or just awareness about what agency to turn to by having a name that is maybe a little more understandable and maybe a little more affirming?
Yeah, we have a lot of people who think that the work that we do is that's done by OPWDD or the Social Security Administration or Workers' Comp, and that is not what we do. While we do have a relationship to SSI benefits, so Supplemental Security Income, which is administered by SSA, that's not the bulk of the work that our agency does. And I do think it makes a difference. Even internally, we've already made some changes. We no longer refer to one of our bureaus as the Temporary Assistance Bureau, but as the Public Assistance Bureau, because that is the name of the program. And I think calling it temporary, while of course that is the objective for those who can work, right? We do want them to move off as quickly as possible. But we don't want people to feel stigmatized as though this is something that they shouldn't access. And so we're trying to send a different message and a welcoming message so that people who are in need can come to us and come to the social services offices to get that support in their time of need, and then we will help them achieve economic security.
Well, we've been speaking with Barbara Guinn. She is the commissioner of, at least for now, the State Office of Temporary Disability and Assistance. Commissioner Guinn, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you very much, David.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.